thank you so much for inviting us. Richard and I, we're both so glad to be here and to be part of this conference. Let me go ahead and show it in this form here. This is the title of our presentation today: Intersection of Language and Culture, Views of Academic Integrity and Plagiarism in Higher Education. So, as the title suggests, our topic today is to examine the intersection of language and culture, especially in the context of academic writing at the university level. And to do so, we want to discuss how our cultural tendencies and practices affect our understanding of academic integrity. It's academic integrity, which is a very important concept. I mean, you can argue foundational to any scholarly academic pursuits. And so I'm going to be discussing a little bit of the theory part, and then Richard's going to come in and really importantly discuss practical ways to address the issue of academic integrity and avoiding plagiarism in the educational context in the classroom, which we're all interested in as educators, right? So there will be pedagogical elements to this presentation as well. So, I mean, to get started, what I'm going to be doing is I want to frame a conversation around intercultural writing by introducing a theory that may be familiar to some of you. Let me go ahead and advance the slide here. And this idea is this idea of contrastive or intercultural rhetoric. So let's go ahead and get started a little bit about that, right? So just what is this? And this is a term that might be familiar to some of you, right? This is a very foundational theory that was introduced in the 60s, right? So if you studied linguistics or applied linguistics, this may, sound familiar to you, right? So let's just begin by defining this term, right? It's an established theory in applied linguistics, and it basically talks about how first language, your mother tongue, influences the writing in your second, third, or subsequent languages, right? So it's a very simple concept, right? And what it's doing is it's attempting to identify problems in the pedagogical context. It's attempting to identify problems in compositions in writing encountered by non-native speakers or non-native writers, right? By referring to the rhetorical strategies of their first language. There's nothing really mind-blowing about this, but what they found in the process of doing research on contrastive rhetoric is that they found that there's a pattern, right? There's a pattern to how certain cultures use language, that it wasn't just random cultural idiosyncratic things that they were noticing, but they were noticing these patterns. And just so that we give credit where credit is due, this idea was first introduced by Kaplan in 1966. And then I think more recently, it was kind of reformulated by Connor. And then she wrote a book updating this theory. But this is very, foundational to rhetorical writing, right? Writing in general. And so I know I'm just kind of giving you terminologies here, but I want to show you, I want to explain this a little bit better by showing you this figure here. Okay, so when you look at this model here, I think it really helps to illustrate what we're talking about here. And this is a model or an image that I share with my class, my writing class, right? Because I think when students see this, they have an aha moment. They get it. They get what I mean by intercultural writing and how that influences the way we write, right? The way they write when they are, coming to USC, right? And so here's the model. Let's look at the very center one right here. This is what we called, the language is a little outdated. This is the Asian model right here, this Asian language, right? And as you can see, it's very circular, right? It's a very circular model. And I think you can see I'm Asian. And so all of you from India can also kind of, I think, relate to this idea of a Asian model here, right? So let me kind of explain, let me just give you a personal story about what we mean by this Asian model of language, how Asians generally use language, right? So this is a true story, right? True story, when I turned 16 years old, my mother asked me a question. This question was, Nina, do you need a car? right? She asked me this question. And in my mind, the answer is, yes, I need a car. I want a car, right? That was what was, in my mind. But of course, that's not how I speak to my mother. That's not how I communicate with my mother, right? So I cannot tell her yes. But what I do tell her is, oh, mom. Okay, and this is where the circular language kind of comes into play. Oh, mom, that's so nice of you to ask me, but I know it's been hard for you with the business, financially difficult because the business is not doing well. But Charles, my older brother, is going off to college, and I don't know how I'm going to take my SAT classes next year. I'm not sure how I'm gonna get to tennis practice next year. Sunny, my best friend, she got a car and she's been able to do all of these things, right? So, I mean, it would be nice, but mom, I don't know, right? So the conversation ended with an indirect answer. There was no direct yes, no, I want a car. It ended with, I don't know. And I remember very specifically this conversation. So I remember distinctly saying to my mom, I don't know. You decide, mom. I can't tell you. It was that kind of an answer. And this idea is that, this is sort of the Asian model, right? It's very indirect, very circular answer. I had a good argument, right? SAT class, tennis lessons, those were very important things to my mother because she knew that I needed those things to go to college, right? And I was also very respectful and non-assertive, which is a key value in Asian communication, right? And so what happens in the classroom is that, students, my Asian students, oftentimes they write in this kind of an indirect, very circular way. The answer is there. I can see it. I can feel it, but it's not directly written out. It's not directly spelled out, right? It's embedded. And the writing is really interesting. It could be really interesting and really rich, but the answer just isn't directly communicated, right? So that's the Asian rhetoric, right? The way Asians kind of communicate. And then there's also the romance. So I spent about 3 years in Eastern Europe teaching there. And again, just one quick story. I remember in one of my writing class, I asked the students, just a 10-minute writing prompt. Everybody, please pick up your pencil, write about what animal are you most like? It was a very simple question. I just wanted them to write for 10, 15 minutes. The interesting thing about that was when I got the papers back, that the question was, what animal are you most like? That was the writing prompt. They just simply needed to answer, what animal are you most like? What was really interesting is that about like 70, 80% of the papers, it began with a question, right? It began with questions like, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be an animal? What does it mean to be a tiger, right? And what they were doing was that they were posing these questions and they were trying to figure out, what is Nina really trying to ask? Because she's not asking me, what animal am I like? She's trying to ask me, what kind of human am I, right? What is, right? They're trying to explore these questions, right? So it's this idea of exploration by going side to side. And again, similarly in the classroom, when I do have some students with this Romance language background, their writing seems to be very like discursive, right? It's very, very, they're asking questions. They're exploring what this means. They get to the end. There's a clear ending. There's a clear arrow at the end. They get to the answer. I am a cat. I am a tiger. It is at the end, but that answer is an exploration. It's a process, right? I'm not going to do the other ones because just for sake of time, but let me just show you the English one, right? And I tell my students, well, where are we? Right, in this model, we're right here, English, right? Do you need a car? Do you want a car? Yes, I want a car. It's a very direct, clear answer. Reason 1, reason 2, reason 3, I want a car. What animal are you? I am a cat. Reason 1, reason 2, right? It's this idea of, that like a, typical English essay, right? Have a thesis, have 3 points, right? Give your conclusion. It's a very direct, linear type of conversation that you're having in the English rhetoric, right? So, I always conclude this talk with my students by emphasizing how rich and interesting these cultural models are, right? And I certainly don't endorse this English model, but I do tell them, but this is the formula. This is the model in which you are going to be writing at USC, in the US institutions, right? Because this is our communication. This is the way we communicate. So we have to understand where we're coming from in order to know where we need to be, right? So we need to understand both where are we now and then where do we need to go, right? And once they know that, they can make that adjustment, right? So let me just say, all of you are educators. I just want to make sure that you also understand when I talk about this sort of theory, there are pedagogical principles here, right? So one of the pedagogical idea is that, students, text should be seen in their full context, meaning some of you may not have students from various backgrounds. You might have students, that are pretty homogenous if you're teaching in the Indian context. But if you do have a global context, right, we have to understand that, students come from variety of linguistic, cultural, social backgrounds. And their papers are going to reflect that kind of variety. Right. So we have to step back from our bias, whether that's a Western bias or an Asian bias, and approach rhetoric by emphasizing, what is important in that context. Right. And it's not about, assimilating to one particular cultural rhetoric, but kind of accommodating and negotiating your place there. Right. So this can have, significant pedagogical relevance in terms of how you approach academic writing. All right, so I'm going to transition a little bit. I apologize if this is sort of a hard transition, but I want to talk about academic integrity. And you might think, well, how are they even related? They're very much related, right? I want to talk about academic integrity because I want all of us to see how culture can influence our understanding of academic integrity, which, it's a term that can be interpreted slightly different. So this is a definition here. What is it? It's academic integrity is this idea of having a sense of honesty and responsibility in conducting your scholarship, right? This is, pretty generalizable, pretty universal, right? You can't really argue with this definition, but at the same time, it's, how we interpret this can vary, right? So, I also always, talk about then academic integrity sort of in the US context. Okay. And, the idea here is that, in the US context, we view academic integrity, the definition is the same. Okay. Let's just go back to that definition. I think it's universally the same, right? This idea of academic integrity, we know it's important, but I think there is something, something that is uniquely American that makes academic integrity more deeply embedded into our educational system. And one has to do with our American values. This value being this idea, we have a lot of international students at USC, and we often ask them, why do you come to USC to study here, right? And, everybody, they all have different answers, but oftentimes we hear from students that, well, America represents, like opportunities, creativity, originality, like new research, like way for them to have a startup business, right? There's all kinds of ideas around originality, creativity. And if you think about plagiarism, okay, because plagiarism is a form of, one manifestation of academic integrity, how it can be violated is that plagiarism represents something where you are saying, no, it's not original, it's not creative. I'm copying somebody else's idea. I'm copying somebody else's word, right? And so that idea, they don't kind of go together, right? And then the other concept of collective versus individualistic society, America is a very individualistic society. It's about the individual's idea, the individual's writing, the individual's word, right? It's not about collectively together, we are doing this together. We are writing this together. I'm using the ideas of others, right? No, it's about the individual, right? So these are some elements that make academic integrity unique, at least in the US context here. And this is, I just wanted to show you this slide just so that we can be clear, right? Sometimes we kind of think of academic integrity as like a general concept or a principle, but I think in academia, in academic context, we have to understand academic integrity, and its different kind of manifestations by looking at plagiarism, unauthorized collaboration, cheating, and falsifying records. And again, what Richard's going to be focusing on in a bit is this idea of plagiarism, right? Because this is a huge issue here. And I did underline unauthorized collaboration simply because it is a very common form of violating academic integrity. And just finally, I wanted to talk about why academic integrity is so important is this idea of fairness, right? It's the idea of having standards for what is allowed and not allowed in your academic scholarly pursuit. And it really does speak to the reputation of not only individuals, but of institutions, right? So, institutions, really highlighting the importance of academic integrity speaks to sort of their reputation, right? The more prestigious a university is, the harder they are on these issues, right, of academic integrity. So they go hand in hand. So these are things to kind of think about as well. Just quickly, I just wanted to define unauthorized collaboration just because I wanted to link it to plagiarism. So oftentimes we think about plagiarism as the key issue that we encounter when we are teaching writing in writing context, but increasingly more unauthorized collaboration has played a significant role. So unauthorized collaboration can be defined as working with others on homework assignments or exams, not permitted by the instructor. But more broadly, it's not just about working together with others. It's also about the giver, giving and receiving assistance. And this is not even giving and receiving assistance from somebody else. It's about giving and receiving assistance from a website, from an unknown person, right? When you memorize a web page or when you memorize certain passages and you try to use it as though it was your own word or something like this, right? So, and it's not just the receiver that is, at fault, but it's also the giver of help, right? If that help is not, warranted. So, these are some of the issues that I want us to be thinking about as we begin to transition into the next part, which is really going to focus on the practical element, the technological tools and resources that are available to assist us as well as to complicate matters, right, when it comes to academic integrity and plagiarism. So I'm basically done. I did have a couple of scenarios that I wanted to discuss, but I think we can put that aside for now. And then we can come back to it if we have a little bit of time at the end. But I wanted to invite at this time any questions you might have. I don't want to spend a lot of time, but maybe just 3 to 4 minutes, maybe a question or two that is directly related to what I discussed about intercultural writing and the concept of academic integrity, its importance.
Okay, thank you, Nina.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, wonderful deliverance so far. So we have a question by Professor Eric here. Allow me to read out that to you. How does the increasing use of writing software fit into the discussion of unauthorized collaboration?
That's exactly why I wanted to bring in that definition of unauthorized collaboration, because now that's a new element, right? Using software to help us to write papers. So that is a form of unauthorized collaboration, right? And so that's exactly why I brought it up. I think Richard might kind of get into that. So the technology part, I might set it aside for maybe at the end. But thank you, Eric, for that question. It's definitely something that's on our mind. And then there was just one other question in the Q&A box. So I can maybe read that one. How to always be motivated when your colleagues don't have a sense of academic integrity. Moreover, they condemn. What to do in such cases when, colleagues are, right? Colleagues are not yet, it's a difficult question. That's a very difficult question, right? Because it has to do with sort of the institutional culture, the institutional attitude towards academic integrity. But I think what you can do as an individual educator, you have the freedom and the right to conduct, right, your classroom in the way that is, fitting to upholding that academic integrity standard, right? Clearly, informing the students about the standards that are expected of them, right? And really kind of adhering to that, even if it's limited to your classroom, right? Even if, but I think we begin in our classroom, right? We can't start changing the institution, but we can definitely begin with our classroom. And the way we conduct that classroom, I think, can translate into small institutional changes, but that's such a huge topic. Yeah.
There are a couple of more which are aimed at the word or the concept that you talked about, plagiarism. So Saumita has asked, in the context of data analysis, what could be defined as plagiarism? Or even the question on the similar line, what Dr. Surashri has asked, how does plagiarism affect academic writing?
Well, I mean, in my experience, it has affected academic writing significantly, right? Because, so we have to understand, we have to agree. So this is the touchy part, is like, what is plagiarism, right? And I think once we agree on what is considered plagiarism, and we have a clear understanding of what plagiarism is, it's not just copy pasting, right? It's like, using ideas without giving them credit, without giving researchers credit, right? It affects academic writing in the sense, there are two practical things, and I'll end with this, and I'm going to turn it over to Richard, is that how it affects academic writing is, number one, in terms of classroom, like as an educator, as a classroom instructor, it definitely affects my my classroom, right? Because, it's not fair. If you are, plagiarizing and, and everybody else is not, that's just definitely not fair. So that fairness comes into play. And then, obviously the other more theoretical response to that is that the student is not exhibiting academic integrity. This student is not showing that, it's displaying the sense of integrity, this honesty, right, in the way they're pursuing their academic pursuit. So that's problematic as well. So, there's many different ways we can tackle this, but yeah, it's a complicated question, and the answer is also complicated. But thank you so much for these questions. I'll type in some of the answers pretty briefly as Richard is presenting. But Professor Gedekar, did you have something to say?
Yes, one more question, if we could take up. Dr. Wasim has asked a question, probably voices from every class. My set of university students required to write a lot of essays for high-stake examinations, and they are perhaps driven by the Oriental pattern as they end up producing a lot of content with less direct arguments. Should I still emphasize academic integrity since the beginning of the course, or let them follow their own patterns?
Well, I think those two things we can separate. I think those two things actually, right? I think we want to encourage. I would argue that in your classroom, you're not trying to teach them a new rhetoric, right? We accept the rhetoric that they have, right? We help them to write, with, good ideas, complex ideas, but well written, good language, right? This is really important. And I think if you look at high stake examinations, they're really interested in the use of language, right? So they're not really looking for, and please, I could be totally off on this, but they're not necessarily looking for organization and rhetorical like logic, right? They're really looking for use of language, right? Accuracy and precision in the way they're expressing language. So I think you can continue to teach them in the way that you are teaching them. But academic integrity is a totally separate thing. Like if students are like, for the high stake exam, and we encounter this with a lot of international students, that students are used to memorizing certain passages, and they recite it when they're writing high stake exam. That is problematic. That is something we need to discuss, right? And that is a topic that, needs a lot of unpacking, right? Because, when you do that, you're not giving them credit. You're receiving help, right? You're receiving outside help. So we need to be thinking about how to approach that particular topic, I think. But again, I will answer some of these questions in the chat box to individuals. Thank you very much for these questions.